Hello, my name is Russell Michler. I'm a technology consultant in Vancouver, Washington. Today I'm going to be talking about Google Team Drive administration, what to do from the administrative side of things to be able to implement Team Drives for your organization. You're probably already familiar with Google Drive, and I'm assuming that you're a Google Drive or G Suite administrator, and you're just looking for additional information on how to be able to roll out and deploy this product to your end users. So I'll be using a lot of technical language as I go through today's discussion. This is a central share repository for a G Suite domain. This was implemented because of peer-to-peer file sharing limitations inside of the regular Google Drive environment. Also, if you happen to delete a user inside of Google Drive, you probably have already noticed that their files go with them, unless that you took specific steps to be able to reassign ownership at the time of deletion. So Team Drives functions a lot like a file server. It becomes a central file repository. It's completely integrated into Google Drive, and it can be accessed through the web UI. It can be accessed through the mobile app. It can be accessed through FileStream. You'll also notice, though, that Team Drives cannot be accessed through Backup and Sync, which Google regards as more as an end user tool for non-commercial customers than you would see for enterprise. Team Drive's comparison to file sharing is that this is more client-server sharing rather than peer-to-peer. Team Drive shares are created by a G Suite administrator that's been given a privilege, and that Team Drive then is managed in terms of memberships. So you assign as an administrator who can have access to which Team Drive, and those Team Drive access rules and permissions are then managed by that administrator and not by end users. Also, membership as well as permissions are designed by administrators, so end users have no influence on trying to be able to change those things. All content that's added to a Team Drive is owned by the Team Drive rather than the end user themselves. Literally, the ACL flips. You'll see that instead of ownership by the end user, it is owned by the Team Drive. So what that means is that if a if a user is deleted, then a file will remain inside of the Team Drive, and that makes a lot of sense. Shares can be issued to groups as well as users, and you'll find that that's actually a high regarded preference. That allows you to be able to do less administration on the file server side, so less administration inside of Team Drives, as where you could be able to manage memberships more through the groups interface inside of Google admin console rather than um, uh, the Team Drives administration tools. A couple of things that you want to be able to keep in mind or think about is that when you are creating Team Drives are set in terms of their inheritance. You have no ability to be able to share any lower than the root level permissions of that Team Drive. So you can imagine that unlike maybe a traditional sharing environment on a file server where you could have multiple shares underneath different containers, you're really dealing with one container that has ACL permissions set, and then any content that's added to it inherits those permissions, and there's no ability for you to be able to change that inside of that share. So you're probably going to end up with a long list of shares, but still, at least it's centralized and allows you to be able to manage it more effectively. So some prerequisites. Team Drives is not available to G Suite Basic. So if you have G Suite Basic licensing, you would need to upgrade your licensing to G Suite for Business or G Suite Enterprise. Or if you're probably fortunate enough to be inside of an education environment, G Suite should automatically come with Team Drives. So Team Drive is now enabled in G Suite by default. It's actually turned on, and you could probably see it if you have the appropriate licensing. It's part of the core suite because it's part of Google Drive. So that means that anything placed in Team Drive is covered by business associate agreements, and like for HIPAA and for other agreements that you have set up with Google to be able to manage data. It's considered part of the core suite. Anything added to this space is treated with a great deal of due diligence. Um, Keep in mind that moving data from the user's Google Drive is literally a migration. That's because when you're copying content or moving it from a My Drive into Team Drives, it literally has to take time to be able to strip out all the ACLs and add and append new ACLs, access control lists to the file object that is now underneath a new set of permissions. So it's not is an easy cut and paste or drag and drop kind of thing that you would see. It actually takes some time, and Google will tell you when you're in this process that you're in a process of a migration, and you'll be notified when the file's been moved. So because it's not an instantaneous process, it's something that you would want to plan and schedule for, so that your end users would be able to know when to be able to see this content when it's available. And like I was saying, there's no permission granularity from the root of the share. You can't change permissions on the folder or file objects that are below that root. Inheritance is strictly maintained. And Team Drive favors less control at the start, which may not be desirable. Myself, I like to introduce tighter controls on Team Drives so that the Team Drives don't get out of hand and becomes just as chaotic as having peer-to-peer sharing. And so that's where I recommend that you delegate administration activities to a special administrator account that you set up to be able to manage Team Drives. So let's talk about inserting a little bit of greater control inside of Team Drives. Inside of the admin console, if you go to admin console, apps, G Suite, settings for Drive and Docs, you'll find that there is a Team Drives creation setting. And right now, these settings should be completely unchecked. Notice that if I wanted to prevent users in my domain from creating new Team Drives, I would have to select this option. I would also have to select another option to be able to prevent full access members from modifying Team Drive settings. I think those two settings are particularly dangerous, particularly if I want to maintain control over the environment. I would recommend that you check those two settings. In other words, you want to prevent users from creating their own Team Drives, and you want to prevent users from modifying Team Drive settings. I want to delegate that to a specific role. And if I delegate that to an administrator, they still have access to manage Team Drives, and they still have access to manage the create new Team Drives. So I'm not doing anything here to harm my administration capabilities. I'm just turning off the capabilities of end users to be able to create and modify Team Drives. Also note, because of the way that you can assign this to different organizational units, you could also control this through OU settings inside of G Suite. So if you wanted to be able to assign these permissions to a different OU, you could also perform those functions from that level. Also prevent people from outside Micron Associates or my domain from being able to access files in Team Drive. Myself, I find that particularly valuable. I want to consider this my own private file share. I don't want any content to be shared with anyone outside of the company. However, some users may find that particularly limiting, but at the same time, you want to maybe control the space so that no information is shared on a routine basis from Team Drives to somebody else. You want to be able to prevent non-members of a Team Drive from being able to access files in Team Drive. So this is making the Team Drive itself private to the members that you select. That's another possibility for you. Also, too, you want to prevent commentators and viewers from downloading, copying, or printing files on the Team Drive. So that restricts their functionality with what they can do with the data if they don't have full editor rights. So to be able to introduce tighter controls, first take a look at those settings and be able to check the ones that are applicable for what you're attempting to accomplish. Second of all, I recommend that you create a specific administrator inside of your organization to be able to manage Team Drives. So underneath the admin console, admin roles, create a new role called Team Drive Admin and assign two privileges. One is for groups, as you can see here on this screenshot, and one is for Drive and Docs. Then assign the trusted users that you want to this role. Now, admins override the prevent user settings in that previous screen I just showed you. So you're going to train these people to use the admin console. They'll log in as usual. They'll go to admin.google.com. When they go into the admin console, they're only going to see groups and they're only going to see Drive and Dock settings, right? So you then train them to be able to manage these two environments, and where they can be able to add groups and be able to manage groups, because groups will function a lot like security groups, where you add people to a distribution list, and then that distribution list itself is added to the share. And then managing Drive and Docs is a required permission to be able to work with Team Drive. So that's what they'll need. So when considering your deployment strategy, you want to be able to identify the groups of users that require access. Now, I will say that if you go out and Google, Google Team Drives deployment plan, there's a nice deployment plan that's out there that allows you to be able to follow some steps. And I would recommend that you probably take some time to think about how you're going to structure your shares, as well as be able to structure your groups for deployment, so that you understand what that security model will look like. But generally, you can be able to create a new group, and that new group can be anything you'd like to be able to name it. So let's say like all users, or HR, or management, or staff. And for all users, you could be able to use something like the special control that allows you to add all users for the domain inside of that group setting, instead of having to constantly manage that over time. Or you could say inside of HR, this user and this user and this user are part of that group. And you're going to create an HR folder inside of Team Drives that's shared to HR. Or you're going to create a management folder that's shared to management. Or you're going to create a folder that could be shared to both HR and to management, right, at the same time. Definitely, you can be able to perform that as well. So creating Team Drives, the Team Drive administrator is the party that's then responsible for creating and managing those Team Drives. So access to Team Drives is given through the Google User UI, and as a Team Drive admin, you can be able to perform functions in that space. So you can be able to right-click the white space inside of to be able to create a new Team Drive. You'll see here on the screenshot, I have 2 sample shares that are already set up. You right-click, you can be able to create a new Team Drive, and you're presented with a dialog to be able to give it a name. I would recommend that you do capitalize all root share names. That's only a visible identifier for you to be able to see that you're dealing with roots, and an easy way to be able to just identify that you're dealing with the highest level of that share. In creating Team Drives, once you're inside, the ability to be able to control the membership and to be able to change its settings is found right here. That's right here, and I see that it's a little bit small in the screenshot, so I did include a larger blow up of it, where you see like my new share, that's the name of it, and then a down select, and then the capabilities that the administrator has to be able to make these changes. Again, if you flip those flags that I was telling you about a little bit earlier, only the Team Drive administrator user that you've set up can be able to manage these things. So you'll see that you can do a variety of things here. You can add members, and you can be able to manage the membership list. You could send an email directly to all the members that are part of this. You can be able to change the settings associated with this Team Drive. You can change its theme, which includes its banner and some of its colors. You can be able to rename the Team Drive into something else, and you can search for content within it. Furthermore, you can also view its trash, and that's content that's trying to be deleted by any user inside of that Team Drive, or you could delete the Team Drive itself. We're going to talk about a few of these. So you can be able to then add your security groups when you're adding new members. I would recommend, again, that you avoid trying to be able to add individual users, as that becomes more cumbersome over time. This is the same rules that we would try to use inside of file sharing environments. You add a new member, and then you can be able to give it whatever access level that you're interested in. And this is very consistent for the rest of the My Drive area, where you see full access, and that's on by default, or edit access, or you want to be able to have comment access or view access. So any of that is appropriate for what you're trying to accomplish against the share. And just remember that you could post multiple parties against this, but the highest permission wins. So if you add someone through a group that has only view access, but then you add that same group to the same share, or another group to the same share, and assign that group full access, the party that had view access now has full access, because you've given them full access rights through the auspices of another group. So the highest wins, if you want to try to be able to think about that. It's not least permissive, but the highest will win. So then the member has access. You could be able to add new members. You could be able to control this list as you feel is appropriate. The Team Drive admin can set the security settings for the share itself. So for example, sharing outside Michael and Associates. Again, you could turn that entirely off from the admin console, but this is where you could be able to granulate that per share. Naturally, you want to consider this very carefully. Is the information that's being added to this file share confidential in any way? Should it even be permissive to share this information outside of the domain, to be able to allow people from outside of the domain to become members, right? So that's probably not something you want to consider very carefully. And sharing with non-members, is this something that do we want to be able to allow end users to share content with parties who aren't members of that particular team drive? Again, you're just trying to maintain the integrity of the permissions of the share, and whether or not that you want to give end users the ability to download, copy, or print any of the content if they're just viewers. And notice this only applies if people have viewers and commentator access inside of the team drive. My recommendation for team drives is always to treat this as a private file share, as if it was in a private server behind your own firewall, so that you are not sharing information with outside at all. It's inside, it's internal, it's used for confidential purposes. The team drive admin can be able to recover data that's deleted by any user from within the trash, and that's pretty cool. It allows you to be able to look at a more centralized container for recycling, like you would on a NAS or inside of a file system for a server. Only keep in mind, though, that files and folders are permanently deleted from the trash after approximately 30 days. That recovery window is pretty narrow. Also, you'll notice that the team drive administrator can be able to go into the console and be able to see that there are recovery or restoration options for the entire share itself. And this is found underneath the team drive settings inside of the drive app for the domain. And you'll notice that there's an option to be able to recover the entire share from a calendar period, but that calendar period only goes back approximately 30 days. And that's highly destructive if you think about it. Instead of recovering specific files or folders, you're recovering the entire share, rolling it back some X number of days within a 30-day time period. So it's not particularly useful for granular restores or restoring anything beyond that 30-day window. You may want to consider, from an administration perspective, a couple of other third-party products that interact with team drives to be able to provide backups against it. One is Spanning, and that's a formerly EMC product. Now it's owned by Dell, but Spanning is a very good product for that, and it's relatively inexpensive. Backupify is also a competitor and will also perform the same function. It will give you more granular control over the backups. It'll allow you to be able to do restores from any point in the file's history. It would allow you to be able to recover one file or one folder and not restore the entire contents of a team drive. So after they're created, what about deployment? What do we do after now everything's ready to go? I would recommend that you train team drive admins to be able to create a consistency around managing shares. The whole purpose of this is to be able to create centralization and to be able to create more management out of chaos. So if you have multiple team drive administrators, everyone should be on the same page. How will these shares be managed? How will shares be given to end users? How will shares be used by end users? What are the naming conventions and so on? Everyone should be on the same page for that. Certainly, too, I feel that team drive administrators should be delegated to end users. Allow end users to manage this so that you as an administrator can focus on more important things than managing this folder structure. Just train key people who are important and competent enough to be able to manage these shares and prevent data from being destroyed. Train your end users and stakeholders as early adopters, and these may be the team drive admins themselves or other people, but you're training a team of early adopters who can then train other end user communities and be their frontline support. This isn't complicated. The end user environment is the same thing that they've been using inside of the My Drive for their Google Drive. If they're at all used to Google Drive, this isn't different. But what is different is how to access or navigate or to be able to get to this space. That may be significantly different if you're coming off of, let's say, a NAS or a file server where they used to find this information underneath, let's say, an S drive, a share drive that used to be mapped to a file server locally. Now they need to look inside a file stream, a G drive, or they need to go to a device setting on a Mac to be able to see that structure now. And that probably is going to take some degree of training for both early adopters as well as people who would eventually come on to the program. You want to be able to set a date with stakeholders for the migration. That's because you don't want to surprise people that, whoop, their files are gone. Where are they now? You want to prepare them for the eventual transition. Um, if you migrate and on migration or earlier, you want to install or deploy Google FileStream. FileStream is the enterprise product, again, that works directly with Team Drives. Again, the Google Backup and Sync product does not work with Team Drives. So if you want to be able to have end users have direct access from their native file system inside of their operating system to see the Team Drive environment, you would need to deploy a Google FileStream to your end user communities. Um, you want to, on the day of migration, of course, turn off existing shares. And I feel this is relatively important. You don't want the users making changes to files that have already been migrated, particularly if you're using, let's say, a server or a NAS. And that's pretty much common sense. But if you turn off the sharing capability, you'll still maintain the files on those other devices until you're ready to discard them or preserve them in some way. But turning off those shares will force users to look elsewhere to be able to find these files. Will force them to go look to how to be able to get onto like Google FileStream or how to be able to access them through the web interface. Be prepared for some confusion with being able to rolling out this stuff and onboarding new members, because there's going to be some maintenance and training associated with this process over time, both for your Team Drive administrator as well as for your end users on how to access this stuff. And I would say that you conduct a quarterly review. Check in with your Team Drive admins, look at new product features, because Google literally is changing this almost every week. Look at new products and features, look at new questions that may be arising from the end user communities, talk to end users about their use case and whether or not that they're accessing things correctly. Keep in mind that a lot of this goes hand in hand with FileStream, and so FileStream deployments probably require a little bit of training as well, how to be able to use offline and online files, how to be able to access information if people don't have access to connectivity, and so on. Also, take time to be able to verify your disaster recovery strategy. Things will get deleted in this space, just like any other share. So you want to take the time to be able to make sure that you have a good disaster recovery process. Again, look at those third-party tools instead of relying exclusively on Google's native file recovery processes, which are relatively limited. So thanks again for your time. Do appreciate it. If you have any all questions, please feel free to get a hold of me. I do technology consulting for small to mid-range businesses, and I can be able to help on lots of matters pertaining to Google. Thanks again for your time, and have a great day.